Imagine risking your education, your career, even a visit from the secret police, just to listen to a Metallica cassette. Imagine paying an entire month's salary for one bootleg AC/DC record. Imagine hiding your favorite music from your own government. For millions of young people growing up behind the Iron Curtain, that wasn't imagination, it was everyday life. Yet only a few years later, those same fans would stand together in the largest rock concert the world had ever seen. An estimated 1.6 million people would gather on a Soviet military airfield to watch Metallica, AC/DC, Pantera, and the Black Crowes. It wasn't just the biggest rock concert in history. For many people, it marked the moment an entire generation realized they were finally free. But to understand why that day mattered, we have to go back to a time when simply owning a rock album could make you an enemy of the state. For decades, the Soviet Union treated Western rock music as something far more dangerous than entertainment. To communist officials, it represented rebellion, individualism, capitalism, everything the Soviet system was trying to keep outside its borders. Government propaganda warned young people that Western music wasn't just noise, it was ideological warfare. One famous Soviet slogan captured that fear perfectly. Today you listen to rock. Tomorrow you'll betray your motherland. To the government, bands like Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, AC/DC, Iron Maiden, and later Metallica weren't simply musicians. They were symbols of Western influence. And symbols could be just as dangerous as weapons. Official record stores didn't sell their albums. Radio stations didn't play their songs. Concerts were impossible. For millions of Soviet teenagers, their favorite bands officially didn't exist, but banning music created an unexpected problem. It made people want it even more. Since Western records couldn't legally be imported, Soviet rock fans found other ways to get their music. Albums were smuggled into the country by tourists, diplomats, and sailors. One original vinyl record would be copied onto cassette tapes, then copied again and again. With each generation, the sound quality became worse, but nobody cared. Even a distorted recording of Metallica or AC/DC was better than silence. Before cassette tapes became common, bootleggers found an even stranger solution. They pressed forbidden music onto discarded medical X-ray films, creating homemade records known as music on ribs. It was illegal, ingenious, and became one of the most unusual chapters in music history. A single album by bands like the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, or Pink Floyd could cost an entire month's salary. For many young Soviets, it wasn't just a record. It was a rare glimpse of a world beyond the Iron Curtain. Everything began to change in the mid-1980s when Mikhail Gorbachev introduced perestroika and glasnost. Restrictions gradually eased. Western films, books, and even licensed rock albums slowly became available. For millions of Soviet youth, it finally felt as though the doors to the outside world were beginning to open. But no one could have imagined what would happen next. Within a few years, the Soviet Union itself would begin to collapse. And that collapse would make possible the greatest rock concert the world had ever seen. By 1991, the Soviet Union was falling apart. President Mikhail Gorbachev's reforms had opened the country, but not everyone welcomed the changes. On August 19, 1991, communist hardliners launched a coup, sending tanks into the streets of Moscow in an attempt to seize control. 3 days later, the coup had failed. The old Soviet system had lost its grip, and for millions of young people, the future suddenly looked very different. Just 5 weeks later, an idea arrived from America that would have been unthinkable only months before. What if the biggest rock bands in the world performed a free concert in the heart of Moscow? Just weeks after the failed coup, the impossible was suddenly within reach. For decades, Western rock music had been treated as the enemy. Now someone wanted to celebrate a new beginning, not with speeches, not with politicians, but with rock and roll. The idea came from Time Warner, the American entertainment giant. Executives believed the dramatic changes unfolding in the Soviet Union deserved something the world had never seen before. A free rock concert, bringing together some of the biggest bands on Earth. To make it happen, Time Warner partnered with Biz Enterprises, one of Russia's first independent concert promoters. Leading the effort were Boris Zosimov and Edward Ratnikov. Helping connect the Western music industry with Moscow was American promoter Tristan Dale. Together, they were about to attempt something no one had ever done before. Then came the biggest challenge. There were no tickets, no guarantee of success, and no way of knowing how many people would actually show up. The concert would be completely free. That meant every stage, every speaker, every flight, every piece of equipment had to be paid for before a single guitar chord was played. The next challenge, finding a venue. Organizers chose Tushino Airfield, a former Soviet military airfield on the outskirts of Moscow. It had the space, But convincing the authorities wasn't easy. When organizers presented the proposal to city officials, they reportedly believed only a few hundred people would attend. Some estimates were as low as 200 people. No one could have imagined what was about to happen. The venue was secured. The funding was in place. Now came the impossible part. They had just 3 weeks to build the biggest rock concert the world had ever seen. They brought in a massive, custom-built stage and a colossal sound system powerful enough to blast music across an open-air military airfield. Just weeks before the concert, one major obstacle still remained. The organizers had a venue. They had funding. Now, they needed the biggest names in rock. At first, the challenge seemed impossible. How do you convince the world's biggest bands to perform in a country that had only recently emerged from political turmoil? Fortunately, they already had a head start. The European leg of the Monsters of Rock tour was already underway, with several major bands performing across cities including London, Copenhagen, and Paris. Instead of building an entirely new festival from scratch, the organizers saw an opportunity. They contacted the managers of the bands already touring Europe with one extraordinary proposal. After the final European dates, would they make one last stop in Moscow? By 1991, Metallica, Pantera, AC/DC, and the Black Crowes were already traveling across Europe, making a stop in Moscow logistically possible. But this wasn't just another concert added to the schedule. It was a chance to perform at an event unlike anything the world had ever seen. The concert was fully financed, professionally organized, and expected to become one of the defining cultural moments of a changing Soviet Union. For the bands, it was also an opportunity to play for fans who had spent decades discovering their music through bootleg cassettes, copied vinyl records, and underground trading networks. Now, for the very first time, they could perform those songs openly for the people who had kept rock music alive behind the Iron Curtain. The organizers didn't just choose famous bands. They wanted a lineup that represented the full power of rock music in 1991. AC/DC were already stadium legends. Riding the success of the Razor's Edge, they brought decades of a rain rock experience and some of the biggest anthems in music. Metallica had just released the Black Album. They were no longer just a thrash metal band, they were becoming one of the biggest rock acts in the world. Pantera, fresh off Cowboys from Hell, represented the new generation of heavy metal. Their aggressive sound and explosive live performances made them the perfect band to ignite the crowd. Opening the festival were the Black Crowes. Their blues-inspired rock brought a different energy to the lineup, creating a balance before the heavier acts took the stage. Everything was finally ready. The stage had been built. The bands had arrived. Thousands of Soviet soldiers took up their positions around Tushino airfield. No one, not the organizers, not the police, not even band members themselves could have imagined what would happen next. On September 28, 1991, more than 1 million people began making their way toward the gates. The biggest rock concert in history was about to begin.